This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today, I'm honored to have Jamin Warren on the show. He is the founder and CEO at Twofivesix, which is a strategic consultancy that helps brands engage in the world of gaming, which is something that is near and dear to my heart when it comes to especially video games and mobile games and things like that. I've built several on the side and enjoy playing them and checking out all the new things that are out there. He also served as the advisor for the Museum of Modern Art Design and Development and acted as cluster chair for the gaming category for Webbys and hosted a game show on PBS Digital Studios. So with all that being said, Jamin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are in your career and your story, and what is that you guys are doing at Twofivesix.
Sure. Well, my background, I started my career as a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. I was covering arts and entertainment for them. The year was pretty significant because, this was 2005 and 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was so much that was happening at the intersection of, culture and the web. And so initially, I was a music journalist before that. And so initially I was interested in just writing about like music and arts and film. But it was around that time I got really interested specifically in video games. I played video games my whole life. And had always been interested in video games, but this was right when the Xbox 360 had just come out, the PlayStation 3 had just come out, the Nintendo Wii had also just come out, in addition to the launch of several new digital storefronts. So you had things like the App Store for the first time, or the Kindle App Store. Like you're starting to see things like Angry Birds, Minecraft had just been launched around that time. So there was just so much that was happening in and about the world of games, and so I thought, by virtue of being a journalist at the paper of record for industry, and games were already breaking all kinds of records in terms of gross sales, like, moving past box office sales. So I went to my editor and said, "Hey, I want to write about video games," and he was like, "I don't really get it." And so they shuttled me over to television, which was apparently another cultural backwater. But I, like many 20 somethings, was like, I'm going to start my own magazine. And so I did. I started a magazine, a website called Kill Screen, which, I'm really proud of that time in my life. We did the first ever arcade show at the Museum of Modern Art. We worked with websites like Pitchfork on their first ever games and music engagement. We were even cited by the Supreme Court in defense of video games as a form of protected free speech. So, but media businesses, are particularly bootstrap media businesses, are very difficult to run. And so around that time, we were also getting, it's probably 5-6 years ago, so it's like 2014, 2015, we started getting more calls from brands and agencies that were interested in gaming, because I was based in New York City, and there just isn't a lot of game making that happens in New York City compared to other places. So, like Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, Los Angeles, Paris, London, New York, there just is not that big of a game development scene. It's changed some now. There's more schools that are generating students, who make games and stuff. But I would get these calls from brands that are based in New York or New York-based ad agencies. They're like, "Hey, we need someone to come talk to our team about, basically about gaming." And so we turned that into, a business called Twofivesix. As you mentioned, we're a strategic consultancy, and we work with brands that are interested in talking to gamers. So our expertise has really been working with non-gaming companies.
Mm-hmm.
Gaming companies in in a lot of different ways. They know how to talk to gamers. That's their core business. But there are lots of folks who are interested in gaming, but they don't work in the space. So they know that their audience is spending time there. They know that their business should be moving in that direction, and they just don't have the internal literacy, or their external partners aren't experts in the space. And so we come in and help them out. So it's been, all video games the last, 15 odd years or so, but the way in which that's manifested itself has kind of gone from, two different, attempts at media into marketing and now consultancy as well.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, honestly. I know it's probably been a bit of a journey up and down, but it definitely sounds like a lot of fun of the things that you guys have been doing. So, tell me a little bit more about what it is that when you're going to talk to one of these businesses and you're going to talk to them about something, when it comes to, they have an idea, maybe we want to build a game to help drive engagement so that we can get more eyeballs on a product or something like that. What are your first steps there of trying to figure out who the audience is, and how that engages and how that differs between different demographics?
Yeah, it's a good question. Some of this has changed over the years. I mean, one of the really nice things about being in the space for so long is, I underestimated the extent to which demographic change is a big driver or preventer of, adopting video games. So I turned 40 this year, and when I talk to folks who are older than me, their relationship to gaming is either non-existent, or it's third party, so it's done through their kids, for example. So they typically are, they're not playing games. If they are, it's usually, casual games or something on the phone. But younger than me, statistically speaking, almost, everyone under the age of 18 plays video games. You see that with the birth of things like Roblox or Fortnite. Just there's a tremendous amount of gaming penetration there from an audience perspective. And so I really underestimated the extent to which brands, and particularly marketing decision makers, wouldn't have a personal attachment to games. And that will change over time. We'll have the first CMO at a Fortune 500 company who grew up playing video games and, will want his or her company to do something in gaming. But, right now it's still mostly perceived as being like a younger person's pursuit. For
Mhm.
us, for our clients, we typically find that folks kind of move through a couple different stages. Their first level is they're interested in gamers, but they're not really sure what it means for their business. So they're seeing things in the news. Again, they're having that third party interaction through their kids or grandkids. The second stage is that they're interested in gamers. They know what it means for the business, but they don't necessarily have a strategy. And then the last layer is they're interested in gamers. They know what it means for the business, have a strategy, but they don't know how to execute. For us, our sweet spot is typically folks who, that second category, they know what it means for their business, but they don't have a strategy. And so we'll step in. We have a phased engagement process where we walk them through their marketing, organizational, and audience fit as it relates to gamers. We help them think about gaming as a channel to really enhance their strengths. That's the other thing that's really tough about games is it's so big. It's a gigantic space, and so it can be really difficult to get a sense of like, A, where should we get started? B, what's in our budget? And then C, what's actually going to drive like impact for our business? And those can all be
Mhm.
different questions. And so, if what you see in the news is, some big, activation that Balenciaga does with, Fortnite, for example, or a big IP partnership with a game like Rocket League or something like that, you might be thinking, oh, that's the only way that I can talk to gamers is through these big, huge in-game activations. And in fact, there's lots of different ways that you can go about doing it, but you just need someone to sort of align where your audience currently is and what your capabilities actually are. So that's the stuff that we work with them on. And then sometimes that just turns into ongoing support when they're looking for someone. They've got they have an internal creative services team, or they have a external partner that they're already working with. But sometimes it turns into a full-fledged campaign and content development where we take them through our initial research and strategy recommendations up through campaign launch support, all that fun stuff. So
Mhm.
but the big thing for us, the most important thing for us, is that we are agnostic and we want what's best for for our customers' clients. So typically when you talk to folks in the gaming space, they have a bias. So if you work at a video game company, you're going to say, hey, look, we're the only people who reach gamers. Or if you're an influencer or, a Twitch streamer, you're going to say, hey, my audience is the right audience for you. And the reality is more, much more complicated. So we're agnostic in the sense that we are going to pick the right message for the right audience on the right channel. But that may be something that is going to be different from what you find elsewhere. But yeah, that's I described that that's a typical engagement, kind of going from interest through ask through actual work.
Yeah. So when a company's going through this, do you typically see these companies like partnering with a Roblox or some other established game and putting a brand within that game, or do you see them kind of building their own thing? And let me give you an example of kind of what I'm going with. So I have an Oculus Quest. I love playing that, and
Yep.
I've noticed that there's a game on Steam that I downloaded that was a KFC escape room game that was free.
Yeah.
And it was all like targeted to KFC. Like, did they just build this game, or was it like, how did that work? Or, what do you typically see when it comes to those engagements?
Yeah. I mean, Casey's a great example because they do a lot. First of all, they've made a strong commitment to gaming as a category. So that's one thing that we often see clients do is they do one thing and then they don't support it. Or they'll do kind of like one big temple thing and then there's no ongoing engagement with the gaming community. So KFC has done an excellent job, I think, of talking to gamers in a native language, but also providing a lot of different ways that they can engage, including like several custom games that they've created. They had I believe like a dating sim that KFC had created. And so KFC I think is an outlier in the sense that they have a full comprehensive, I'd say a full comprehensive strategy for reaching gamers. But for a lot of clients, what we really encourage them to do is to start with like where their audience like actually is. And so, doing something inside of, you mentioned, you have an Oculus. There's a certain obviously customer profile for someone who's going to own an Oculus, right? And so that may or may not match who your target demographic. So that's going to be the first place that you start. And the second thing is identifying which channels they're active on. So it could be creating a custom game experience. It could be partnering with someone to do something custom inside of their experience. Could be in-game advertising. It could be not game related at all. It could be focused on like Discord or Instagram or YouTube. It could be another channel where your audience is congregating to talk about games, or it might be something that's IRL. So doing an activation or physical activation around like a big games conference, whether that's the Game Developers Conference or Summer Games Fest or something along those lines, or PAX. There's many different fan first conferences. So that's the stuff that we really try to encourage folks to not pick a location first. Start with where your audience currently is, and then work out from there. Because there's nothing worse than building something and then realizing that your audience is not spending time there.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me, because you imagine if someone you put all the time and effort into building something, putting it out there, and realizing that no one's looking at it.
Yeah. I had this conversation, a couple weeks ago, with a woman who runs a fashion label, and she was, obviously there's been a lot of fashion lines that have done stuff in Animal Crossing and now with Fortnite, and Nike has done stuff, or Roblox, for example, has been another place where fashion brands have played. And I was asking her, I was like, well, tell me, she was really dead set on doing something inside of Fortnite or in Fortnite Creative specifically, because that's if you're not working officially with Epic Games, then your options are more limited. And so I was asking her, tell me a little bit about your audience. And, her audience is mostly women in their, 30s and 40s. And I was like, look, that audience does play games, but the audience, the games that they're going to play it's probably not going to be Fortnite. It doesn't mean that there aren't like women in their 30s and 40s that don't play Fortnite, that do play Fortnite rather, but that wouldn't be the first place that I would start. So I was like, well, why don't you build out something based on your current Instagram and Instagram account instead, because you can test there, you get more data and information, your audience is already there, start to engage the game playing side of your existing audience on a channel that you already have. She already had like 20, 30,000 followers. And so I was like, look, start there. It's a great way to test, but don't spend 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars on a custom engagement in Fortnite that, you won't have the ability to monitor how someone moves through that space. And you won't even know if it works on the other end from an attribution standpoint. So yeah, I mean, really aligning where your audience is with the right gaming channel is really, really important. So yeah, I can't say that enough.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about how that would work, or what that would look like. Being a developer, I've built iPhone apps and games before, and When you say Instagram, how do you use Instagram for a gaming platform?
Yeah. That's a really good question. So, I'll take one step back. I mean, one of the challenges around talking to gamers is that there's a lot of different ways to be a gamer. So, if you
Hmm.
we think about it in three different ways: through identity, through affinity, and activity. Activity has been like the traditional way that people think about who is not a gamer, right? So, what platforms do you play, right? So, do you spend time on Switch? Do you spend time on mobile? Do you have a PlayStation 5 or PC or whatever that might be? But there's other ways to engage with gamers through other parts of that gaming that gaming ecosystem. So we use affinity, for example, to describe someone's like social graph. For example, are they following accounts on TikTok, for example, that are really gaming centric? Are they liking or engaging with posts or other content on social platforms? Do they subscribe to Spotify has like League of Legends music playlists, for example, right? That's a way in which you're engaging with gaming culture that might be different from whether or not you're spending time playing esports or something like that. And then the last piece of it is just the identity piece, is whether or not someone self-identifies whether or not they are a gamer. And so the Instagram stuff is really interesting because that's a place where you can do stuff with gaming. So that could be everything from like sharing gaming related like memes or content or news, to kind of more custom stuff. For example, we saw this with Animal Crossing, where you had a host of fashion brands, or the Getty Museum here in Los Angeles was sharing stuff that they were sharing in-game artwork, for example. But the main distribution channel for that work was over Instagram. So even though it was work that it was entirely centered in and around a gaming universe, it was stuff that was created inside of a game. The way that stuff was distributed was not inside of the game. It actually happened over social. So that's kind of what we're saying there, is that like, there are opportunities to create things and then distribute and, and get folks interested who are gamers, but aren't spending time inside of that in-game universe as well. The other thing I'd say is that, for myself, this has definitely been true as you get older, that one of the challenges that you might have grown up playing video games, you love video games, but your life stage can also dictate how much time you actually have to play games. Speaking from personal experience, I have an 8-month-old daughter, and so my time to spend time playing video games, if I wasn't running this business, for example, would be almost zero. But since I run this business, I spend time obviously playing games because it's part of my work. But that's another big thing too, where you have people who residually identify as gamers, but aren't spending as much time like playing games. And then obviously that will change as she gets older and we can start playing things together, which I'm very excited about. But that's all stuff that, like, as marketers, you can speak to those different pieces of how someone exists in the world of gaming, not just through like having them inside of a game itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And as she gets older, you're gonna have a lot of fun, because I have a 12-year-old, 8-year-old,
Oh
and a
yeah,
4-year-old. I bought them all the like, so I bought the Atari Classic, the Nintendo, the
yeah,
Super
yeah,
Nintendo, the Sega, and the PlayStation 1. And I took them through a history lesson of video games. I was like, we're gonna play the Atari first, and we're gonna go to
yeah,
the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo. And I showed them all the different little cool things. And of course, now they just play Xbox and PlayStation all the time, or their
yeah,
iPads.
yeah. But
I
that
think
is I mean,
Roblox is.
that is a really big change. And I think for, certainly for Gen Z, they're the first generation to grow up with parents who may be fully game literate, that
Mhm.
grew up playing video games themselves, in the same way that, like, your parents would share like what records they listened to as a kid, right? And you may not like them, but that's a way that they can engage with you, is like, oh, I used to listen to music as a kid. Let me share that interest and passion with you. And I think that that's something that's definitely new for Gen Z, where they have parents who maybe are continuing to play video games, or they're playing board games with friends, and they know how to talk. They're like, look, I grew up playing games too. Like, I want to share that interest and passion with you. So it's something that we can do together. And obviously, kids are going to be kids, and they're going to do their own thing. Like you said, they are going to end up gravitating towards basically the places where their friends are. But the ability to have a game native conversation with your own children, that is a big sea change. That was not something that I had growing up, and previous generations that older than me that play video games. That was not something that they had with their parents or even with their peers. So that is very exciting for me in terms of how it will shape the way we think about that generation thinks about games as a part of their specific identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know sometimes gaming gets a bad rap. You say kids are always in front of screens, and and I do agree that there are pros and cons for everything, and there's a balance for everything. But one of the cool things I wanted to mention that my son plays Roblox a lot, and in Roblox you can get like coins in different places where they're at, and he's learned entrepreneurial like tendencies through Roblox, which I think was pretty cool. Like he's been going out and buying like chocolate and candy from these people,
Hmm.
and then going and selling them for higher prices to other people and like making money and having like a little business within Roblox, which I thought was pretty cool that, as an 8-year-old, he's learning these like entrepreneurial skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, and that's been a big change from when I played games when I was a kid. Is I mean, there's I'd say two big pieces that have really changed, particularly
Mhm.
with the newest set of games. The ones that are really popular right now. I'm thinking of Roblox is one. Minecraft is another, even though
Yep.
that game doesn't get as much maybe public attention as Roblox does. It's still one of the biggest games on the planet. And then also a game like Fortnite. I think that the interesting thing about those universes is one, they're inherently social, and so that's one weird thing about games is that when we talk about social networks or social media, we typically focus on Facebook, we focus on Instagram, TikTok, because that's what the press is engaged with. But if you think about them as being as places where content is shared and information is shared and your friends are, then video games are some of the most popular social media networks on the planet. The other big thing is, as you alluded to, is the creative side of what's happening with games is really different. When I was a kid, making a video game was not the easiest thing on the planet, and there's so many tools, whether they're in-game creator tools, things like Fortnite Creative or Roblox, for example, or Minecraft, to a lesser extent. Those are gateways to things like Unity and Unreal, and that's all
Mhm.
stuff that is just, it's so much easier for kids to be able to make that transition from playing video games to making video games. And Roblox is super interesting because in and of itself, Roblox is not a video game, right? It's a collection of other people's creations, and so it's much more of a platform in that respect. And so that is going to have a huge impact, I think, certainly on the next generation, because they will grow up with the experience of making games, whether that or not that's something that they do professionally. That's going to bleed over into their expectations of what things should look like at work. It's going to bleed over to what kinds of experiences they share with their employers someday, right? So being able to say, like, I built a business on Roblox, that's the new, lemonade stand, right? A sign of
Yeah.
entrepreneurial success. It's like, oh, I managed a small team and we, built something together, and we put together project schedules and like all these things that sort of in some ways are predicates for being good, being good business folks in the future. I think those are all things that video games are very well positioned to set up with the next generation of kids. So I'm not super concerned about the screen time stuff. I mean, I'm probably, I'm probably more skeptical of like, social media platforms than I
Mhm.
am of video games. That's not an area where I have concerns there. I think they're, fundamentally good things for kids to be able to spend time doing.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I think I do want my kids outside some,
Yeah, of course.
but I do also think like I love the fact that my 8-year-old's asking like for next summer he wants to go to a Minecraft coding camp instead of
Hmm.
like regular camp. I'm like that's pretty awesome because when I was your age, if I didn't learn to code till I was in college, it'd be awesome if I learned how
Hmm.
to code, at a younger age. So I think that's pretty cool that we had those opportunities now that didn't really exist before, and going back to what you're talking about, social networks, and the fact that I definitely think Roblox and even Minecraft are becoming like those social networks because that's where my son is like, oh, can I be friends with this person because they live down the street or whatever in Roblox? I'm like, okay, it's very similar to like being friends with someone on Facebook, but
Yeah, yeah.
it's even more. It's almost, and now I think we're getting into that, like with Oculus, we're getting into the metaverse and things like that, and the connections there, and I imagine these are going to be spilling over more into business. I know Meta's trying to do that right now, uh, but it's not. I haven't seen it be super successful as far as using the metaverse for business yet, other
Yeah.
than building games and marketing and advertising. But I imagine that's coming, and it's getting closer and closer. What is your
Yeah.
take on the metaverse?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I've been through multiple rounds of I've been through multiple rounds of this. I mean, I
Mhm.
when the last VR wave, I'm looking at my desk right now. I have, I remember when the Oculus project came out on Kickstarter, and I got my hands on one, and yeah, organized one of the first VR arts conferences at the New Museum. And so I've been watching the space for quite some time. I think my challenge is, right now, if you were to look at what you can currently do in the metaverse, like the platforms that would sort of be self-described as the metaverse or get roped into the metaverse discourse, the biggest ones are all video games. We're talking about Roblox, we're talking about Minecraft, we're talking about Fortnite, right? So when I see like folks say like, oh, so and so is happening in the metaverse, that is often shorthand, and Beat Saber maybe to a lesser extent, or something like Supernatural maybe to a lesser extent. But for the most part, the most popular places where the metaverse lives today is mostly around video games. The reason that's significant for me is that over the last 15 years, I've seen multiple attempts to not talk about video games, but want to draft off of video game success. So when it was, World of Warcraft was really popular, that sort of got rebranded as, virtual worlds. When Farmville was really popular on Facebook, that was rebranded as gamification. When you had things like, League of Legends, or which is still obviously incredibly popular, League of Legends or Overwatch, those got rebranded as esports, right? And the macro category is just video games. And so my challenge is, it is possible that the future of the quote unquote metaverse is, at least as it relates to like the consumer metaverse, like what we do as individuals. I can't speak as much to the B2B or enterprise side, but that may just be video games, and that is okay with me. And so I think you have to make peace with that. It's like, it's possible that the sort of the end state for this is video games, or something that feels very much like video games. And I know that can be a hard pill to swallow for some folks, but I'm still I'm very bullish on video games. I think the road towards this being the metaverse being something that is like useful in a productivity context or a work context outside of very specific places, I think is a very long road to go. I mean, it's still pretty difficult to like type. It's, what I mean? Just, a very basic thing. But maybe, if the future for the metaverse is some sort of handshake with like remote work environments, where it's just, instead of us doing this podcast virtually over Zoom, it's something that we do like inside of a virtual environment, that I could definitely get down with. But as a place where, I think as a place where people spend all of their time, the pace car is video games. So that's the, that's the competition. So I think I'm still waiting to see, to see something that's not video games to, be a dominant part of the metaverse discourse, if that makes sense.
Yep, I agree 100%. I think that's exactly where, it feels normal to be for video games. It feels natural. I've tried the Zoom app through Oculus. Like, it just doesn't. I would rather be on my computer doing Zoom.
Yeah,
I don't want
exactly.
this headset on while I'm doing Zoom, but I do want the headset on when I'm playing golf with my brother-in-law, who lives, 6 hours away.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely agree. I think video games is definitely the place where we need to double down on.
Couldn't agree more.
So what do you see as kind of the next thing that companies are going to be focusing on when it comes to driving engagement on gaming platforms?
Yeah. I mean, I think one big area that we're keeping an eye on is in-game advertising. That's one where that's been obviously very well developed in the mobile space. But a lot of the advertising that happens on mobile games is mostly driving additional game installs. That's that's that big piece of that market. So we're watching like a couple different platforms, so things like Anzu, or there's a new one called Gadsme, where you're able to place a range of different things, whether that's like in-game items, so you basically have a version of like product placement inside of video games, up through digital billboards or other types of like interactive like ad units. That's one. And the reason I bring that up is just because like that is from an attention standpoint, right? So if you look at a company like Netflix, and they're like, the future competition for our business is something like Fortnite, because video games compete with other platforms, whether that's like everything from linear television through magazines, books, other forms of media. If you're thinking about places where eyeballs are, video games are obviously a place where people spend a lot of time, and that's been a space that has been relatively difficult to for advertisers to tap into without something really doing a really big, expensive custom engagement. So in-game advertising, something that's a bit more turnkey, particularly because games are so many games are free to play now, and so creating an additional revenue stream for game makers, if they're going to offer their games for free, to create opportunities opportunities for advertisers to step in. The other reason that's a big deal is just because like anything that can be a bit more turnkey to reach gamers inside of it, and particularly if it's a natural, diegetic, non-obtrusive context, that's stuff that I think is like really exciting and is a great way for folks to experiment. So that's one big place that I think we're definitely seeing, definitely like the future of gaming. I mean, the other one, the other places, I think there's definitely an open question in terms of what the next generation of game streaming sort of like looks like. Twitch, for example, has been, a lot of folks have been moving from Twitch to other platforms, places like YouTube, for example. So I'm very curious about like TikTok's live feature to see. Live has typically been a great place for games to live. So that's another space that we're watching pretty closely. And then, I would say the other thing on the brand side, I think I mentioned this before. I think I'm very excited about the next generation of marketers that are going to integrate gaming into their existing marketing programs and campaigns and not treat it as a sideshow. That's an institutional thing that I think will happen over time, that we'll stop thinking about gaming as being like some niche one-off thing and being an integrated part of like how we market, particularly to Gen Z. So those would be like the three big things that I'm keeping an eye on. I guess with the addition of what's going to happen with say with like Apple's whatever happens with Apple's headset, and whatever the adoption rate is for the new Oculus headset that they announced last week. So that's stuff that I'm keeping an eye on. There isn't as much like space for us to play there directly, particularly with clients, but it's something I'm keeping an eye on if it points away towards something that we need to be paying attention to in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I know with the company that I work at, we're a linear TV station, and one of the things that we've started doing is putting games on our website to try to drive engagement and having games that are targeted to our audience, and that has been very successful as far as keeping people on there and having more people shifting between the normal side, the game, and then coming back and watching something and going back and forth. It's been really, really successful of the way. And kudos to our marketing group that really put the effort into knowing which games would hit, with our audience and putting them on there. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a huge trend going forward. Like, I think brands that traditionally did not do stuff in video games, particularly whether that's making video games, that's a place where I think you're going to see more growth there, with basically non-traditionally gaming publishers publishing games in some capacity. So good example is the New York Times. When they acquired Wordle recently, they already had started a games division, but it's a pretty new division. It started about 5 years ago. And so they have been experimenting with some new things to build off the back of their crossword product. And so for them, building out a universe of word-based games, particularly for them as a subscription-based business, that's been a real growth area for them. But we wouldn't necessarily think of the New York Times as being a games publisher. Netflix is another one. They've been making some acquisitions recently of game studios, experimented with some. And initially, their stuff started with like interactive games inside of the Netflix platform, and then that kind of blossomed into a whole Netflix games division. I think that's a place where you're definitely going to start to see more competition, which is brands that maybe traditionally, particularly in media and entertainment, that didn't make games or didn't publish games, because that was sort of the provenance of, if you had to be a Microsoft or Ubisoft or a big games publisher. I definitely think that's a place you're going to see more activity, is brands like looking at like, hey, look, we should be making our own games, we should be funding our own games. That's all stuff that Annapurna Pictures, another good one. Annapurna Interactive, they publish a bunch of independent games, for example, alongside of like a bunch of feature films. So that's something I definitely think is going to be a bigger part of the future as well. Like brands that you weren't thinking of that did not make video games will start making video games in the future. So we're already starting to see some we're definitely already starting to see some headway there as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Netflix, like you look at kids, especially young kids, they can navigate Netflix before they're 2. And
Yeah,
to put
exactly.
games within that, it makes it so easy for them to stay on that app and stay in that platform and not have to go to another ecosystem and learn something new. So I
Yeah,
think that's going
exactly.
to be a big hit for them. Hey, this has been great. Jamin, if you don't mind, just tell the audience how they can connect with you online and learn more about the things that you guys are doing over there, and where they can just connect.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're on all the social
Hmm.
platforms. It's 256 TWOFIVE6. So just
Hmm.
256 the numbers written out. We publish a weekly newsletter at 256.co. Actually are also we have our own podcast, 256podcast.com. But you also find us on LinkedIn under 256. I'm Jamin Warren at Jamin Warren at on Twitter. That's probably a place where I spend maybe too much time. But yeah, those are all places. I mean, definitely would recommend checking out our website for insights. We're always happy to share more about that intersection between games, culture, and marketing, and hopefully that's useful to to your audience if they're looking to kind of take the next step and think about how games might be impactful for their business.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, one last question. Where did the name 256 come from?
A good question. So it grew out of the kill screen project that I had done many years
Hmm.
ago. So, old video games had, software and hardware were on the same chip. And so you could play a video game to get to a kill screen, right? And that oftentimes happened on level 256. So that happened with like Donkey Kong, for example,
Ah.
Pac-Man, level 256. It's, those kill screens are, the cousins of the spinning beach ball of death, or the blue screen of death, the spinning beach ball
Hmm.
for Max. And so we took the name 256 from to sort of as an allusion to that heritage. So yeah, to the eighth power. So I think that's what probably I
Awesome.
think most folks would know it as that. Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's great. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
no problem. All right, take care.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.